Welcome back to our Drone Wave Summit. My name is Kaylee Nix, and on our fireside chat today, we're taking drones out of the air and into the water. We've got President of Deep Trekker, Sam McDonald, here with us today to tell us a little bit about what her company is doing to explore the depths using that drone technology. Sam, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm really excited to talk about this.
Thanks, Kaylee. It's great to be here. Thanks for thinking about drones under the water in addition to being in the air. To be fair, underwater drones were around before aerial drones were even a thing. So, remotely operated vehicles have been in the water since the 60s, but we didn't really come into fame until the famous aerial drones made people aware that there were these robots running all over the ground, in the air, and the water.
Which is it's crazy to think about because when people talk about drone technology, they automatically think four spinning rotors and dropping packages off at your door. But Deep Trekker is really cool. I was watching your guys' video about what you do. Can you tell the audience a little bit about your inspiration behind Deep Trekker and how you got started?
Sure, it's been a decade-long journey from the beginning until now. A couple of extra years of development in the beginning, but for me personally, growing up in the Great Lakes area of Ontario, and in particular around Tobermory, Ontario, where there's tons of known shipwrecks and really thousands of unknown shipwrecks, I was always curious as to what was under the waves and what discoveries could have happened, but just never got around to getting my scuba diving ticket until, one day we were out on boats and somebody ended up dropping a flashlight at night down. It was a great flashlight. It was one of those big mag lights, and it was shining up at us from about 40 feet down, and we couldn't get it. And I think it was me, I'm going to take credit for it anyway, said, you know what, we really need a robot to go get that, like an underwater drone with an arm on it. And I thought that I had, this $1 million idea, and then I had invented something, as you do when it gets late in the evening. But as it turns out, after doing some research, remotely operated vehicles, as they're known, or underwater remotely operated vehicles, have been around for a good long time. However, they were sort of in the realm of, the experts. So they were complex, and they were difficult to use. Sometimes you had to go to school to get a rove pilot's license or an ROV pilot's license. So I really wanted to make something that was really simple, out of the box, easy to use, and I thought it would be picked up by boaters, maybe by police search and rescue. What I didn't envision is that there would be legions of our Deep Trekker drones, deployed around the world in over 100 countries, working in everything from space research to environmental research to oil and gas and energy, wind energy and solar. We're in fish farms. So we see our remotely operated vehicles and robots deployed in a wide variety of industries, which I didn't even know most of those existed at the beginning. So it's been an interesting journey that started with a dropped flashlight.
So you guys are really making this ROV technology accessible for the regular person who wants to do it, right? Tell me a little bit about the tech that you guys have developed and what the actual robot looks like, how you guys put it together, and the types of applications it can be used for in the real world.
Sure. So our flagship product, what we call the DTG2, it stood for Deep Trekker Generation 2, up in the air about what generation was, maybe a college project or one of our early designs. But Generation 2 was the first one we sold. And if you can imagine, it's like a little gray basketball. It's about the size of a basketball, and it has thrusters and a camera on it. So that's in its most basic configuration. We do have another larger version of it called the Revolution, and it's also got 6 thrusters and a camera on it. That's somebody who's calling me who wants to buy one. But they all of the robots come with that camera, but we wanted to make it simple no matter what other sensors were put onto the robot. So as soon as we made something that was really simple, chuck it in the water, turn it on with your gaming controller, and you're off to the races. And then somebody said, well, what if you can't see in the water? So we had to add sonar to it. And how do you know where you are under the water? Because you can't have GPS go through the water. So we started to add things like what they call ultra short baseline locating. It's kind of like GPS under the water. And then people wanted to have really great stability and positioning. So we added things like IMUs, which is that thing in your phone that lets it know if it's straight up or down. But a bunch of those on there, plus this really fancy sensor called a Doppler velocity log, which measures your speed along the bottom. So you get those three things that sort of act like GPS under the water. Then we wanted people, people wanted to pick stuff up, so we added grabber arms to it. People wanted to know if they could do non-destructive testing with it, so we did things like CP probes and thickness gauges on there. People wanted to know if they could detect hydrocarbons if there's been an oil spill, so we added those onto. How much chlorophyll's in the water, how much dissolved oxygen. So we added all kinds of different technologies for a wide variety of industries, but we always wanted it to be really simple and easy to use. So we had to build a system to integrate all of those sensors so the user just still takes it out of the box and puts it in the water and does what he needs to do without a lot of complexity from him. So we took care of all that complexity ourselves.
Wow. That is so cool. Just like kind of drop and go, and you can use it for a million different things. So specific to like the freight and logistics industry, the maritime shipping, do you guys have any clients or see any applications for your system in freight and logistics or maritime shipping?
So maritime shipping is one of our most important growth industries. So for really in the very recent past, the classification and insurance bodies have really started to look at remotely operated vehicles and underwater drones for doing those underwater inspections. So they call them UWILD, underwater inspection in lieu of dry docking. So instead of taking these enormous ships out of the water, can we do these inspections without taking them out, and B, deploying divers and putting them into harm's way? Can we use these robots? Can we be sure that the inspection of the ship was done in a most thorough manner? And now that the technology has increased so much, and like I said, those sensors are available, it's easier than ever now to use remotely operated vehicles to do that. The second part is we're looking at fuel economy. Fuel is the most expensive thing in the shipping industry, the marine shipping industry. And so you want those ships to slip nicely through the water and not have a lot of parasitic drag on them, and make sure that they are running smooth. And paint companies and coating companies are, they're coming up with new technologies themselves to ensure that there isn't a lot of marine growth, but these coatings are also environmentally important. So they don't want to use coatings that are bad for the environment, but also still able to resist that growth and make sure that there's no growth, and there's no things holding back that ship running through the water for fuel economy. So they're leaning on the robots more than ever now, both the coatings companies themselves as well as the ship operators, to ensure that they are in tip-top shape for the shipping industry.
That makes absolute perfect sense. Have you guys put any thought towards, sometimes you hear stories of freight going overboard. Obviously, that's like a worst case scenario, especially from a shipper standpoint. Have you guys put any thought or application into maybe deploying your ROV for when that freight does go overboard, whether that's locating it in port? Obviously, you couldn't do it in the middle of the ocean, but if it falls off in port, has that been done at all?
Yeah, it has for sure. So there's a couple of things that the robots are used for in the port operations themselves, and certainly accidents or incidents are one of those. If something goes overboard, if there is some sort of damage to both the ship or the container, you can have what we call eyes in the water in 30 seconds. So you can get a situational awareness of what's happening below the waterline in literally a minute and a half. You take this out of the box, you put it in. If it's something that is, a threat or a danger that is unknown, so if we take the oil ships that were in Bahrain, for example, that got hit by what is suspected to be an underwater AUV, and damage was there, they couldn't deploy divers because there was an active threat in the water. They really didn't know what had happened, but they could have deployed an ROV and instantly known at least what they were up against. They may not have been able to see what they were hit by, but they certainly would be able to do a damage assessment in a really fast way to know, okay, is this something where we need to really hurry up and get divers in the water to repair that, or bring the ship into the dry dock, or is this something that we can wait and assess the situation? And the same is true of a container. If a container goes over the side, is it damaged? What type of salvage team do we need to bring in? What are the other hazards that are in the water? And you can do that assessment with those ROVs straight away. And as for the treasures in the ocean, I'm just waiting until we get ROVs that can go deep enough that I can go on my own personal treasure hunt for some of the things that have fallen off.
There's a lot of good stuff out there, and honestly, who knows how deep it could be down in those ocean trenches. So you mentioned a little bit about research being done on those environmental impacts, and we just wrapped up a net zero carbon summit last week that was talking about the transition to kind of net neutrality and the shift away from fossil fuels and into kind of preserving that carbon neutrality for us. Talk to me a little bit about any research projects that you know that are going on with your ROV to kind of measure impacts of carbon on the ocean or anything like that for the changing ocean landscape, and how they're playing into research for climate change.
So we work with a number of different universities and institutes around the world who have used ROVs from anything from environmental sensing. So like I mentioned, what is the oxygen saturation that's in the water? What are the other chemical constituents that are at the different trophic levels? So that's the different depths of the water. So actually doing the water sampling themselves, doing visual inspection of the reefs and the ecosystems that are under the water, and managing that change over time. So it's important not only to see what the situation is today, but is it changing and how quickly is it changing? So doing those routine surveys of those fragile ecosystems is super important. Other work that's been done have been on artificial reefs. So bringing back, the important wildlife and the different organisms that will really help the ocean health. So making sure that those structures are put in place, helping to do the pre-construction assessment, as well as being an eyeball while they're building up those reefs, and then measuring to see what types of wildlife are being attracted to those artificial reefs. And is it something where human intervention, which is always thought as a bad thing, can be really looked at as a positive thing for ocean health? So ROVs are involved in every part of that aspect for sure.
And you mentioned that you guys got your start up in the Great Lakes, and so obviously that's freshwater, non-ocean related use. Do you guys see any deployment in maybe like inland ports, along rivers, anything like that?
Yeah, I was shocked at the first call that I got from Utah. So I'm a mountain biker, so I figured Utah is just all desert. But the reality is there's water everywhere. Now we call ourselves the Middle Ocean. We have some pretty big bodies of water, but really ROVs are being used in ponds, are being used in drinking water reservoirs, whether those are natural or man-made. We do a lot of dam inspection. We have done search and rescue in rivers. We've done work on locking systems, so locking through the rivers and infrastructure there. We've been used to measure impacts on the fisheries in the rivers around Ontario and in Canada and the U.S. So really, water everywhere is really the case. So it doesn't, you might not think that an oceanographic equipment company should be right smack in the middle of Ontario, but there's, I'm sitting, actually can't see it, but I'm sitting right in front of a body of water that we use to test our robots right here in Brant County. So it's just a small, about 10-acre lake, and we've done all manner of exploration of the lake and been able to even measure the changes in our own little backyard lake here. So they are available to be used anywhere: ocean, freshwater, flowing water, still water. Whether that's man-made or natural, ROVs are everywhere.
Truly, just like a myriad of uses. You can use them any which way. So for maritime shipping, obviously ocean currents play a massive impact in the shipping industry, because if you're fighting currents or if you're not sure what the water's doing, then you lose on time, you lose on fuel efficiency, everything that we were talking about before. Is the reach of your robots large enough to kind of understand those ocean currents, or is it more of just like a localized look at the space right by you?
So there's some interplay to underwater robots, and I think there is some confusion out in the marketplace. Well, at least in folks that don't work with things on a regular basis. But there's two general types of underwater robots. There's what's called an AUV. It stands for Autonomous Underwater Vehicle, and these are the things that you'll read about. Oh, the Chinese stole the Americans' underwater drone. So that's what they're talking about, is an autonomous underwater vehicle. And what those are sent out to do is really long surveys, and whether those are for defense or they're for infrastructure or for their environment. And you program a pattern, and they'll go out and do long missions, and what they do is called mowing the lawn. You can imagine they're going like this over a certain area, and it can be miles, if not hundreds of miles wide. But you can't see what's happening in real time. So they'll be collecting data, whether that's video data or sensor data, and they'll return to the surface. And if they're sophisticated, send those over a satellite system back to the home base for analysis. Now, ROVs come in after that analysis is being done, and you see something, or you detect something that's an anomaly, or that's changing over time, or maybe an indication that those ocean currents aren't working in the way that they used to. And that's when you deploy an ROV to do what we call ground truthing. So what was that strange thing that we saw, or that strange bit of change in the ocean consistency that we don't quite understand? And you deploy an ROV at that point to check out what has happened. So the interplay between the AUVs and the ROVs is very important.
That makes a ton of sense. A ton of sense. Okay, so my last question. The Suez Canal crisis that happened back in March, would one of your ROVs been helpful in dislodging that ship quicker than it happened?
So I have a great salver and friend of mine. I won't mention his name because I haven't asked his permission, but I called him up and I said, "Hey, are you on the way to the Suez?" And he's like, "Yeah, that they stopped me in Egypt, and I'm not going to be the one that's doing the job." And I said, "Well, if you end up getting deployed there, did you bring equipment with me?" And he said, "I've got my Deep Trekker Revolution in tow." So I'm sure that they did deploy ROVs to see what exactly had happened. Right, that bulbous nose seemed to have gotten itself stuck, but how far in was it? How much? Was it stuck on a piece of dislodged rebar or concrete versus just being stuck into the sand? What was holding the ship? How deep is it? Certainly we could get an awareness of what was actually happening, what type of equipment is going to be needed to get this thing unstuck. So I would be really surprised if ROVs weren't deployed in that situation. And if they weren't, well, shame on them. They certainly could have been useful. ROVs have been used in all kinds of marine disasters. We don't like it when they happen, but they're certainly interesting projects for ROVs, used in all types of ships sinking completely or just becoming lodged. Salvage and remediation is one of the most important things that we do with the remotely operated vehicles here at Deep Trekker as well.
Awesome, Sam. Thank you so much for joining us. I totally enjoyed learning about all of the applications of those underwater vehicles. And where can people go if they want to learn more about Deep Trekker or connect with you?
It's www.deeptrekker, so like Star Trek, but deeptrekker.com.
Thank you so much again, and make sure that you're staying tuned and staying active in our live chat, and stay more tuned for more drone waves.